I'll begin today by acknowledging the traditional custodians of the lands on which we meet. I'm joining this concert from the southernmost lands of the Darug Nation. I pay my respects to elders past and present, and I extend that respect to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people here today. Western Sydney University acknowledges that the teaching and learning undertaken across our campuses continues the teaching and learning that has occurred on these lands for tens of thousands of years. So I'd like to extend a very warm welcome to our guests and our audience from Western Sydney University and beyond for what will be a very educational and entertaining workshop, I'm absolutely sure. This workshop has been organised by Dr. Waldo Garrido, who's the academic course advisor and performance convener for the Bachelor of Music here at Western. Waldo is an internationally recognised performer and recording artist, and he has invited 5 outstanding musicians to join him in this workshop today. We have McIver on trumpet, Josh Meader on guitar, Ed Goyer on piano and vibes, Ed Rodrigues on drums, and Trevor Brown on sax and flute. And of course, these performers do play together as a sextet, and we've had the pleasure of hearing them on campus here before. But this is only one string to their bow, and they all perform with many other high-profile groups and are in demand as studio and university teachers as well. So I will hand it over to you, Waldo.
Thank you very much, Claire. Yes, I'm very fortunate that I've been able to work with these 5 musicians for a very long time, especially with McIver, who we've been in various projects together. Ed Goyer, we've been doing things, musical things for, I don't know, about 24 years or something, and I'd like to thank you and thank the university for making this possible. This is, I guess, part of a 2 kind of series that I'm doing on kind of industry, events. This is on improvisation and kind of looking at jazz, and then looking at the importance in some of the jazz theory in popular music and how it kind of filters through contemporary production of music, the contemporary production of music. So yeah, so what I'll do is I'll ask McIver to take over as the to convene this. And he'll introduce the other musicians as well. Most of the musicians I've been working with. I'm on a pretty big project with George Meader and Alex Acuna and Frank Gambale. We're doing a project together. That kind of shows you kind of we're both very different, I guess, improvisers. But when there's a fundamental kind of understanding of jazz, I guess you don't have to be called a jazz musician to be absolutely. I don't call myself a jazz musician, but I've had the pleasure and to play with some of the Australia's best. I mean, I was a member of the Catholics before, and I played with Mark Isaacs and some of the kind of luminaries of Australian jazz, and I'm fortunate that I've played with this musician. But I'll let them kind of show you their approaches to jazz and improvisation, and show you how wonderful they are. McIver, on to you now.
Hi everybody, welcome. I just wanted to start out just talking about the idea of improvisation. Improvisation has been in music forever. It's not a new thing. Early music involved quite a lot of improvisation, especially embellishment, and to a large extent, it has continued through lots of popular music. Improvisation kind of went through a dark period in the classical period, where there wasn't a great deal of improvisation going on. Few artists were trusted to do their own cadenzas, but composers started writing cadenzas as well. So it's not a new thing. It's always been part of music making and the creation of music. It's certainly developed over time, and through the benefit of history, we now look at improvisation in various different ways. You can improvise in an idiomatic way. So, you know, for instance, something like traditional jazz, if you're playing in a traditional jazz band, and, you know, there's a particular expectancy on how you might improvise and work within that idiom. And it's no different for, you know, bebop, free jazz. You know, you can choose to play idiomatically, or you can choose to play outside of the idiom. You know, you can be more explorative within the idiom. So, you know, there's very different ways that you can actually approach improvisation. You know, there's forms of kind of contemporary art music writing called New Complexity, which is really about writing something so complex to the point where the musician is forced to improvise. So that's kind of inciting improvisation. And these are all really good ways in which to, you know, create music making. Composing. And I think Trevor's going to talk a bit more about this later. But, you know, when you compose, you're essentially improvising. And as technology has developed, you know, the piano might have been the tool in the, you know, the classical period and early, you know, 19th, 20th century. But now our tools are very different, and we utilize them in different ways. And in some ways, a lot of the improvising that goes on, especially in popular music and exploring, is actually not around the actual notes themselves, but the sound sources and reactions around those notes. And Trevor's going to come to that a bit later. My approach as an improviser is quite broad. It depends on the project that I'm working with. I feel like in some projects, especially, say, for instance, those of you that have seen me play with this particular group, as a trumpet player playing in a Latin style, there's a certain expectation of what you might produce in the context of your place in that ensemble. And so I always am quite conscious that, you know, there's a certain amount of fire needed from the trumpet, a certain amount of excitement, and that, you know, you do have an idiomatic kind of place within the ensemble, and there's an expectancy that you play like that. There are other ensembles that I play with where I use much more space and silence in what I do, and a much greater range of dynamics. For instance, in the polymorphic orchestra, or Trevor and I, well, Trevor runs a group called the Sydney Improvising Composers Collective Orchestra, which is an improvising orchestra, and Trevor might touch on that a little bit later for you as well, as to how that works. And you know, again, I play very different in that, because my place in that ensemble is quite different again. So you need to have a different range of how you approach improvisation. It's kind of, you know, not one, you know, you don't just have one thing in your back pocket. You have improvisation should be true to the music and the style that you're playing to a large extent. Having said that, that doesn't mean that you can't be explorative within that style. You don't have to just be, you know, idiomatic with that style. As a way of kind of looking at that, we did a little project where Waldo played a bass line and then sent it over, and Ed Rodrigues put some drums on top, and then Ed Goyer played some keys on it. I wrote some horn lines for kind of an A section. Josh put in a B section, and then Josh, Trevor, and myself, we separately blew solos over it without any understanding of what each other had played. So there was no reference to carrying on from where a soloist had stopped, or there was the only reference was the kind of the musical bedding that had been produced. And I just want to play you that, one, because we're here to talk about music and we should actually hear some music rather than just me rattling on. But two, there's two different versions. What I'll do is I'll play you the first version, and then I'll just play you the solo section from the second version, because it's really interesting to look at the three solos and how they're approached. So the first one will have trumpet solo and guitar solo, and then then I'll go to the second one and I'll just isolate the sax solo. I'll just grab that for you now. Here we go. This is the full track, and then I'll just play the solo in the next one. Yeah, so you could hear there that there were in the solos there were two quite different approaches, and from an improvisational point of view, I guess, you know, as each layer goes in, there's a certain amount of improvisation. You know, the keyboards, the drums, you know, it's all just being created on the fly. So it's not just the soloist that's improvising, and that's also really important. You know, when you're improvising, you need to listen to your ensemble. You've got to have big ears, and you've got to know what's going on, and react and work with them. You know, they're not there just to kind of push you along as a soloist. You know, you have a conversation, and there's points through there, and, you know, the little melody that I wrote, it really all came from, you know, Waldo's bass line, the placement of the emphasis of the rhythm, and how both Ed and Ed jumped onto that, and then the color that Ed Goyer put upon it, and that informed everything that happened afterwards. So you've got to listen out for that type of stuff. I'll just quickly play you the solo, the alto solo, just to give another perspective on a solo. I'll just find the spot on guess. Here we go. So there you have three quite different approaches to the solo. I guess you can kind of see there's a connection. There's a connection between my solo and Trevor's solo. And then you can see a connection between Trevor and Josh's. You know, my solo was quite idiomatic, very much, you know, I guess you could say Art Blakey, Jazz Messengers, post kind of bop style. Trevor's was a little more progressive, probably, you know, heading more towards the kind of 60s and 70s in some of the stuff he was doing. And then, you know, Josh leapt forward quite a bit further than that. So everybody had their own take on what they were doing in that. And as I said before, none of us actually had heard each other's solos at all. It was all done in isolation. Everything was recorded in isolation. So, you know, it's an interesting exercise from that perspective as well. So I'm happy to come back and take questions later and talk more later, but I'm going to pass you over. I think we'll go to Trevor next, and then after Trevor, we'll head to the rhythm section, maybe to Ed Goyer. All right.
Okay, thanks. Does that sound okay? Can you hear me? Good. Thanks, Lee, and thanks everyone for being here. Yeah, it's interesting. So much to say about improvisation. Where to start? I'm going to speak quickly and run through a million things, and take what you will. I had planned some things, and I thought actually I should probably improvise the talk on improvisation. What is interesting, going back to what Lee was talking about, is the idea of improvisation. What makes it, why is it special? Why is it in some ways prejudiced? Why it's 50-50, the way that people will, someone will say, oh, it was improvised, or wow, was that improvised? You know, and when are those distinctions, you know? So someone will come and say, did you just make all that up? That's amazing. Or someone will say, oh, they're just making it up. Anyway, so it's an interesting thing on your on who's listening and who appreciates what it is that the act of making music in real time is. And I subscribe to the idea that it's real-time composition. And then, you know, if you want to look back into the classical or the at least 20th century era, both Stockhouse, well, starting with Schoenberg, was talking about composition being frozen improvisation, and that it all starts with improvisation. And similarly, Stravinsky talks about the why would you not just play music if why would you write it down if you just can't play it? So he was very much into, he was a performer and player as well as a composer. So it's the very much to the idea of composing in real time. And so I think that every improviser, and now, so we fast forward to 21st century now, where we actually have you're a product of your sound world. So your sound world is a concept that I like to play with. It's actually all the sounds that you've heard, all the music that you've heard, whether you like it or not. It's your prejudices are based on what you've heard. So you may hate a certain sort of music. So when you choose to improvise, you will steer away from it until someone gives you a gig, and then you have to do it. And then and then you'll find a way into it. But interestingly, I was referring to, there's some famous tips from Thelonious Monk, the jazz player, a composer, 25 tips for musicians, which Steve Lacy, who also famously, when asked what is improvisation, he says the difference between improvisation and composing is that a composer has all the time in the world to make 15 seconds worth of music, whereas the improviser has 15 seconds. But then he also buttonholed, got a hold of Thelonious Monk and asked him 25 tips. What's important? This is around about 1960. And he talks about, a lot of people have seen these, but they're all handwritten by Steve Lacy. And it's just many things, not in any particular order, but just because you're not a drummer doesn't mean it doesn't have to keep time. So he writes these little quotes. Stop playing all those weird notes, play the melody. And this is what always comes back to, always play the tune. And so this is what, in my little improvisation back to what was just, what we just listened to, I was focusing on, so what I played was actually all reworkings of the 5-note melody that that Lee composed, and that came also from the Montuno sort of Latin groove thing. And so so it was all working on what was already there, because I can play all day whatever, but it's actually the skill that comes in with reworking what's there. So back to Thelonious, what else does he say? Some interesting things about always look sharp, because they're not just playing for the music, so it's also about fashion. Discrimination is important, he says. And then what reminded me of that was he says, you've got to dig it to dig it. So you've got to actually enjoy playing. It's really important to enjoy what you're doing. And so then we can touch on to authenticity. So, you know, you can learn all different sorts of styles, but is it real? So that's something that I think the musician, when we talk about cultural appropriation and concepts of this, I think the musician sort of has a free pass to move through these things, because that's where creativity comes from. Anyway, this is easy to keep talking. What I'm going to do is play. So I was going to play some actual. I've got this whole array of things set up here to do a live production performance, talking about the ideas of the 21st century musician is informed by all the music that has happened and that you can access all the time. I'll just tell a quick story. When I studied, I was a classical flute player, but I was interested in other forms of music. So I heard on the radio once some Brazilian choro music. It's an amazing form of flute music. This is back in the 80s. Heard it. What is that music? Apparently it's Brazilian choro. So I went to the music library. No one had ever heard of Brazilian choro music. The Brazilians hadn't arrived in Sydney yet, you know, and they weren't playing choro for sure. And then so I couldn't find this music. Like, it's intensely difficult music, and couldn't find a recordings of it. Just didn't exist. But I really wanted to find this interesting flute music. So a couple of years later, I was a first trip overseas. I was in Paris and I was in London. I was going to music libraries trying to find this choro music, you know, and then still couldn't find it. And then met some Brazilians. Said, oh yeah, choro. No, it's a bit daggy, but it's like, oh, I want to, you know, I want to find out more about it. Oh, we don't know about. We're much more into forró. Anyway, so 25 years later, I was reminded by hearing some music on the radio, and then I just Googled choro music, and I can download all of the charts of everyone written ever, you know. So that was just, it's at your fingertips. Whereas in, you know, just 20 years ago, you would have to travel to Brazil if you wanted to find this music. And so, you know, and so now musicians are learning things off the internet, you know, and not necessarily being authentic, but you can still take the elements of it. So I think that is an interesting thing. It's similar to jazz. You know, jazz was once the music of a culture. You know, let's just say, I mean, my theory on jazz is that it really formed in the 20s and 30s. If you got a gig in a dance band and you would play 3 shows a night, 6 nights a week, on a residency for 6 months or 3 years, that was your gig. You play 3 shows a night, the same tunes 3 times a night. And if you played them wrong, you'd be out of the band. So there's 18 gigs a week for months on end. And you get to really internalize that music. You know it inside out. Now, you know, sometimes it'd be difficult to get 18 gigs for a jazz band in Sydney in a year. And somehow we're informed, like we're expected to play at that sort of level. So we, you know, we develop into other areas. So much talking, not enough music. Anyway, I'm going to try to share a screen, and then just quickly show some things. Desktop 2, bunch of stuff. Okay, so hopefully that is shared. Okay. There's the monk stuff. What I've been, I'm teaching improv at the Sydney Conservatorium at the moment, and we haven't been able to do things face to face, but I've been doing a lot of stuff with conducted improvisation, which is Lee referred to earlier. Sydney Improvisers Composers Collective Orchestra. It's a bunch of musicians, fantastic musicians who are also composers. It's important that people write and have a concept of writing. Anyway, one of the people I've been working with in Europe, Marcus Stockhausen, son of Karl-Heinz, he works with a different concept of improvisation, non-idiomatic improvisation, which is, and the process is different. When we prepared for this show, we all lived together, the whole ensemble lived together in a German country house for 5 days and ate 3 meals a day and practiced 6 hours a day, every day, 3 hours of e-training in the morning and 3 hours. And so I don't know if this is coming through, but this is in a cathedral in Cologne. And Marcus has has he only uses about 4 or 5 different symbols, but all the work is done before. So it's conducted improvisation. Nothing's written. Anyway, I'll flip through these things quickly. Anyway, it builds, so the ensemble is, you know, really interesting instrumentation. It'll jump to where other areas. Jump to here. Anyway, all sorts of crazy things happen. Yes, Lee, you are the second best trumpet player I've worked with. Marcus is amazing, like absolutely extraordinary. I can't take that away from him. So that's that. Here's our version. This is the Sydney Improvisers Composers Collective Orchestra, SICO. During lockdown, we raced down to legally. Were you there, Lee? Yes, you were. Those who were brave enough to do an illegal concert at the Carriage Works, we went down and did this. So that's, with that project, I'm using cymbals taken from 3 or 4 different orchestras, the London Improvisers Orchestra, mixing them all together. Basically, they're symbols of form and structure and dynamics. No notes are written, but the ensemble create them all. And then maybe just to finish, talking about so this is another lockdown piece that we made as an audio-visual thing. We basically, I asked everyone to create a 30-second video and then sent it to a central spot, and then like a corpse exquisite, an exquisite corpse, basically create one line of music and then send it to nominate the next person and then send it to the next. No one knew, so everyone could hear the previous layer. But then what became interesting, and this is just going back to where Lee was that so some people may have had a totally different idea of how to approach it. And so in the end, as being the artistic director, I mixed and created it into a thing that I thought was okay. But there were some areas where someone, would set up one particular groove, and then someone else would set up some nice thing across it, and someone would play something that was in a particular style, and the fourth person would destroy it, and intentionally, just to and then so and which is totally fine if you're in a improvising situation and people want to do that. That becomes very interesting. You're on stage. Here I have the luxury of technology to allow me to edit people. It just goes a bit like this. So it's 7 minutes long. Stop talking, listen. Yeah, so there's lots of nice little interesting bits. It ends up anyway, lots of fun. So that why I show that is it's the way that people can encompass a whole bunch of different sound worlds. It's all from the same ensemble, but just travels all over the place. Basically, people composing on the spot. Thank you and good night. Over to whoever. Stopping sharing. Was that too long? It was way too long.
No,
Thanks, Trevor. I'll pass it over to Ed Goyer to entertain us next.
Thanks, Trevor, for that. It's really interesting to hear everyone's take on improvisation, because it's not something that I normally ask people, you know, how do you approach improvisation? I don't think I've had that conversation with hardly any musician that I've played with. So I'm finding this really, really interesting too. And I found it really interesting to think about it myself, because I actually don't know how I improvise. I know why I do it, because it's great fun. But how do I do it? Then I started to think about where I was when I first started to learn improvised music, which was some time when I was 15, 16, and then later when I studied at the Con. And how did I get from there, all those years ago, to here, where I am now as an improvising musician? And that's sort of what I want to talk about, some of the things that I've just practiced over the years. Of course, I still feel like the same improviser I was when I was 17, 16. Of course, when I hear recordings of myself when I was, you know, studying at the Con, or when I was 16 or 17, I sound awful. But I thought I sounded great, you know, at the time. But we all thought we sounded great. But I suppose the difference is now, I hope I'm playing better, but I always think I sound terrible when I hear myself back. So you become a bit critical as well, which is not a good thing. But back to the point, I just wanted to talk about what I've been doing over the years. The first thing I've always done as an improvising musician is I've always been listening for sounds, whatever that is. The first thing I ever heard, which captured my imagination, of course, when we first started using, you know, minor 9 chords, for example, you know, like first time I heard that, I was like, wow, you know, what's that sound, you know? And then I heard a sound that when we were doing some listening back at the Con, the Glenn Miller Band used to finish on a chord that sounded like this. It was always at the end of the piece, and I thought, that's a great sound, I really like that. So I went back and transcribed it and had a listen to it. It was just a 6/9 chord. Not that hard, but the point is that I've always been sort of collecting sounds, different sounds. So if I hear whatever it is, any band, I think, wow, that's a really interesting sort of harmonic idea. I wonder what that is. And over the years, I've sort of kept a bank. Sometimes I used to, like a mental bank or a notebook. Sometimes I used to write them down. Other times I just play around with them and absorb these sounds. So then they would come out in my playing. I used to notate them, and I found by writing them down, it just helped to internalize it. The other thing I do with them is to play the sound. So the other day I heard this sort of really funky chord. It was sort of like that's really interesting sound, and it was really thick. But I eventually worked out that it was sort of like a C major sound with some type of G major 7 sound on top, right? Anyway, the point is I liked the sound, and then what I did with that sound was I just play around with it. So I just go. Yeah, I mean, I could go on all day, and we can all do that. We can all go on all day improvising these lines. But the point is that by doing that, I've internalized that sound, and that's a new string on my bow that I've sort of added on. That sort of brings me to my next point with thinking about how I've got to where I have over the last, 20 or more, 30 years as an improviser. One thing I always do is find the time just to be creative, not to practice scales or practice changes and all that stuff, which is important, and I'm going to get to that in a minute. But just to find time to actually practice being creative, because I don't think it's something that you can just spontaneously do. You have to sort of work at it. And by having that time where I'm just playing around, maybe half an hour of just letting one idea morph into another, I've found that really useful for improvising. Because a lot of it's going to come down to that spontaneous, melody that you have to make, or someone else has thrown you an idea. So going back to that idea again, I just might just sit here and, develop some. Right there, that's the Glenn Miller 6/9 chord. So, that was just the sound that came out. And how does this stuff come out is because over the years I've gradually built on different sounds and ideas that I've internalized in my head. And at different times I'll come out depending on, the instrument I'm playing, or depending on who I'm playing with. But I think for me, that's always been a really important part of my improvising. I had a friend who was a writer, and it sort of reminded me what he used to do. He used to, every time he went out or whatever, he'd have a little notebook, and every time he'd say something that he thought was interesting or whatever, he'd be scribbling it down in his notebook all the time and getting you to repeat it. I haven't spoken to him for a while. I think it was getting a bit annoying. I said to him, man, you have to keep writing all this stuff down, But I think that was that process of being a writer, and for me as an improviser, was sort of similar. We were both keeping notes. I was keeping more musical, harmonic sounds, and he was keeping sort of, ideas and concepts and phrases. The only other thing I wanted to sort of touch on was the other side of improvising, apart from the creative side, is the technical side. For me, was also another really important part. So learning how to play the chords and understanding all that, especially when you're at university and you're studying this stuff, is really important. And of course, doing technical changes and playing around the changes is not really creative, but it's important to be able to do that. when I was in New York in 2014, I got some lessons off some musicians over there, and one of them was Mark Sherman, who was teaching at Juilliard. I think he still is teaching at Juilliard, and he showed me this really interesting approach to practicing changes. I don't think it's really that amazing or anything, but I'll share it with you. So if we take the song Autumn Leaves, which everyone knows, the first chord is a C minor 7. So what you do is you just play the C minor 7 arpeggio. You can start on any note. I'll start on the C. The next chord is F7. So what I do then is I take the closest chord tone. So my next closest chord tone to the E flat with C, and then I'll play just a straight F7. I could go down, I could go up. So you get this. And the next chord is B flat, major 7, so, and then E flat major 7. So it sounds like this. Yeah, not what you call really creative, but it's a really important technical part for me as an improviser, learning how to get through those changes. Once you finish that, you can add the ninth. So in C minor 7, I'm going to put the D in there. And it becomes like this. Like I said before, it's not what you call really creative stuff, but learning how to do that at speed and over a new song that I get, or any song that you get, is really important, I think, to be able to work your way through those changes. So when I get a new piece, say, for example, Tenderly, I was looking at that today, you might, yeah, that's the classic jazz standard. The first thing I do when I get a new piece of music as an improviser is just try and play the sounds with that arpeggio method. So that way I'm just working my way through the chords, and then I'll play around with some inversions. And then when I feel comfortable with the song, it's like meeting someone for the first time, it's like, you introduce yourself, get to know each other, and then you feel more relaxed, you can talk about different things. To me, that's like playing Tenderly, or any new piece that I come across. I just want to approach it like that first, with working my way through the chords, and then making it more complicated, trying some scales out. Sometimes I just play it as let the chords ring out. And I just absorb the sound. Yeah, and once I feel comfortable, then I'll start to be creative and spend more time on the improvisational part of it. So I suppose that's how I've been approaching it for the last 20-something plus or more years as an improviser. And I think that's my approach anyway. Everyone's got a different way of doing things and getting to where they are now. But I think it's important to remember, just to summarize and finish, is that you never stop developing and learning as an improviser. So you're always finding new sounds, new ways to play things, new ways to approach the music. So it's really a lifelong process. And it does take quite a long time to get to where you want to be. And I still don't know where that is. So there you go. Thanks, guys. That's it from me. And maybe we'll have some questions later. So over to whoever.
Thanks, Ed. I think we'll go to Ed Rodrigues on the drums. We've had a fair bit of melody and harmony, and then we'll finish up with Josh. And I know that there's probably some guitarists out there waiting for Josh. You'll just have to wait a little bit longer, but here for the drummers is Ed Rodrigues.
All right. Can you guys hear me all okay? Bit louder? Is that better? Awesome. So yeah, I think everything that everyone said has been really incredible so far. But one of the things that I sort of like to think about and focus on myself is this idea of music as a language. So it's a little bit more systematic and not maybe exactly how you want to be thinking all the time while you're improvising. But when we're beginning to learn our sort of, basic steps of improvising, the ideas of call and response and all this sort of stuff, what we're doing is we're developing a vocabulary, much like we develop a vocabulary for any language that we're learning. And so I don't necessarily look at improvising as a lot of people might initially think of the concept of playing new things all the time. It's more combinations of things that we already know. Like, it's very hard to use a word that you've never heard before. And I think it's a little bit the same in music. But then the beauty sort of comes in and the new stuff comes in with the varying combinations of what you do and how that juxtaposes against what the other people in the band are doing. And that kind of reinforces this language point. So you're having this sort of conversation with the soloists around you. Now, on the track that Lee played for you earlier, that was a bit difficult, a little bit sort of a different scenario to be improvising in, because I didn't have a song form, I didn't have anything. I was given a bass line, and I didn't have a tempo marking or anything, and it was 5 minutes long, which is quite long, and I was sort of trying to approach it from several different ways. So I recorded a few different versions of it, all with different kind of grooves and different kind of ideas, but also with the focus of thinking about how someone might be able to perform over it and where the phrases might fall and where the phrases might sort of land. Especially with what Waldo was doing on that track, it was a very sort of not cliche, but very common Latin rhythm is to emphasize beat 4 instead of beat 1, or in jazz, we'd sometimes emphasize beat 4 and so that was something that I grabbed onto. So if I was playing a phrase, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. So really trying to come out on the 4 of all that. Now, when I think about going back to what I was saying before about music as a language, I'm just going to pop this PDF in the chat for everyone. I think that we can start breaking music down to sort of its building blocks. And this isn't a very... sorry, I'm just trying to figure out how to upload a file here. Sorry. For some reason, it's only uploading to... Here we go. Pardon me.
In theory, I think it now allows drag and drop. So you can possibly even just drop it in the chat if it's PDF.
Oh, great. Excellent. It's stuck in a direct message. Anyway, I'll share that in a second. I'll just carry on with things. So if we're looking at like the building blocks of rhythm, for example, I like to look at something called the table of time. Now, the table of time is just a really great way of internalizing subdivisions. And subdivisions are really important because they can help create a style of music. So like on a very basic form, we might have straight eighth notes versus swung eighth notes. That's going to be a rhythmic interpretation that's going to drastically change the feel of whatever you're playing. Now, if we take the time scale, we're going to start with quarter notes as our sort of basic pulse. And then from there, we're going to divide 6 beats over the 4. So we're starting with 4 beats, and then we're moving to 6 beats. Now, this is an exercise that it's a great way of priming your brain to sort of really having the subdivisions in recall, really having everything sort of like right at your disposal if you ever need it. So just the whole table of time as it's written, which I'll share in a moment, sounds like this. We've just got quarter notes, 2, 3, 4. Now next we want to play our quarter note triplets. So we're going to be breaking into triplets and grouping into 2. So 1 triplet, 2 triplet, 3 triplet, 4 triplet, 1 triplet, 2 triplet, 3 triplet, 4 triplet. Now next we're going to have our 8th notes, which are just going to be 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and. Then we're going to have our triplets. So 1 triplet, 2 triplet, 3 triplet, 4 triplet, 1 triplet, 2 triplet, 3 triplet, 4 triplet. Then our 16ths, 1 eanda, 2 eanda, 3 eanda, 4 eanda, 1 eanda, 2 eanda, 3 eanda, 4 eanda. Now you can keep going up to 5s. And this is where this exercise becomes a little bit interesting. And we can sort of use words to help us, we all know that we can use words to help us with our rhythms. But say you're at 4, 1 eanda, 2 eanda, 3 eanda, 4 eanda. Now you're playing that 4. The next thing to do is prime the 5 in the brain. So university, 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 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And then back down, 2 eanda, 3 eanda, 4 eanda, back down, 2 triplet, 3 triplet, 4 triplet, back down again, back down again, back down again. Now that's just our rhythmic scale. So we're just going from basic quarter note all the way up to quintuplets. Now you can stop at the 3/2. I'll just change it for a sec. You can stop at the 3/2 and start to create interesting kind of melodies now. And I'm just going to do this with the drums off because this is kind of like, this is almost like I'm using like a 3-note or 4-note if you include the bass drum kind of idea. But so if I go from quarter notes into crotchet triplets, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, then I can move those around the drums. Now I can move the same thing into 8th notes. And that's the time scale in its rawest form. Not super musical, not super interesting. But what we're doing is sort of internalizing all of these subdivisions and building our own sort of mannerisms, if you will. So as you practice these, if you're playing a melodic instrument, you might choose a 5-note grouping. And then you could use that subdivision, and then when we sort of are in a playing situation, what I think this gives us is sort of some ammunition. It gives us something to fall back on and not have to really think too much about. So if I'm playing along and I hear somebody play, if I'm playing like a jazz thing like this, and I hear someone play some 16th notes, it's really easy to access that 16th note from the triplet to the 16th. Now you could even react as a drummer for all you drummers out there. You can mix those two things up. So you can have your swung here, triplets, And then so you have a beat of 16th notes moving to a beat of swung 8th notes. So you can mix all these things up, and you can start to go from 2 to 5 to 3 to 6, and jumping around the table of time and using it as a means to just sort of really internalize anything odd. Now, quickly before I just finish up, I just want to talk about one more thing, and that is polyrhythms. Now, polyrhythms are like, sort of built up as this incredibly difficult mathematical crazy thing, when really I think it's just a case of being familiar with the sound again. So it's another extension of vocabulary. So if we just look at the second degree of the table of time, those triplets broken into 2, we have our quarter note triplet. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 1, 2, 3, 4. What we're doing, and what you'll see when I manage to put this sheet in the chat, is we're taking triplets, so 1 triplet, 2 triplet, and we're grouping them into 2s. So we're going 1 triplet, 2 triplet, 1 triplet, 2 triplet, 1, 2, 3, 2, 2, 3, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 2, 2, 3. Now, all we do to work out any polyrhythm, that's 3 against 2, right? We take the first number, the big number, and we divide our beats by the big number, and then we group our beats by the little number. So 3 over 2, we divide into 3, which is triplets, and we group those triplets into 2. So 1, 2, 3, 2, 2, 3, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2. Now, if we have 5 over 4, for example, it's exactly the same thing. We just divide the beat into 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then we group those 5 into 4. So we'd have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, back to 1. Now, it's always the same. Like 27 over 16, same thing. Divide by 27, group into 16. I can't hear that fast. But if we just take the example of the quintuplets, so 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Sorry, I messed that last one up. But yeah, you get the idea. So any polyrhythm, take the large number, divide the beat by that, then group those subdivisions by the smaller number, and you're home and hosed. And it's just a matter of doing these things till you're really familiar with them. But yeah, thanks guys.
So we'll move over now to Josh, and he can take us through his thoughts on improvisation.
Yeah, sweet. Thanks, everyone. And thanks, everyone, for putting this together. It's been fun, and it's been cool hearing everyone's approaches. And I just thought I'd talk a bit about my approach to improvisation and maybe the key elements I think about when improvising, and maybe the things that have helped me the most throughout the years of playing with improvisation. And a lot of things are definitely similar to what's already been said, but I'll go through it all. So I think I'll talk through the elements. So I think we have like the big ones, like technique obviously is a big part of it. We have theory. Some of the smaller, I guess, melody is super important too. Dynamics, contrast in general, rhythm, all those elements. And then I think they're all kind of pulled together by this term vocabulary and language, which is what Ed kind of touched on before. And I kind of see improvising the exact same way. I think almost every style is, for me, like a different language, and they each have a very specific vocabulary or idiom or idiomatic language, what similar to what Lee was saying before. And to be able to play in that style, I think you really have to study that vocabulary to be able to portray it. And then once you know it, you can kind of add on top of that. And that's when kind of improvisation maybe comes out, is when you're really familiar with the vocabulary. So, vocabulary being one of my, the main thing I've worked on probably over the years, and I work on that mainly through transcription. So taking, say, a phrase and then slowing it down and then learning all the notes. And I think a super important thing is to understand what all the intervals are and maybe their relationship to the context of what's going on. So say it's maybe a particular chord, like a minor 7 chord. Once you learn that line, learn every single interval and how they're working with that chord into, to create the sound. If there's any notes outside the particular scale that might be in there, having all that knowledge ready to go, I think is really important for it to then come out in your own playing. For vocabulary to come out in your own playing, I think it just has to be super comfortable, both technically and theoretically as well. So maybe I thought I'd just do some examples of maybe phrases that I've got recently and maybe how you can use them in different contexts. So, for example, maybe a lick. I guess they're all licks, aren't they? But a lick I got a couple of days ago, maybe something like this. Is this coming through all right? So it's a little Guthrie Govan line from a solo online. I think it's the Larry Carlton jam or something, which is in C minor. And this little phrase. So it's a very strong kind of sound that's rooted in kind of a minor scale. So I think to understand that, we just have to go through whatever box, like especially on guitar, I guess this is a very guitaristic thing, but finding the exact position where that scale fits in then and analyzing those intervals in relation to the chord. So this is C minor. So we'd go through 5, 1, 2, flat 3, 4, 5, flat 7, 4, flat 3, 4, 5, 2, flat 3, 2, 5, flat 7. Once we know that and we can see all those intervals on the instrument, or we can hear them, I guess that's another big part of it, is actually hearing what all these intervals sound like in reference to a chord. Then it kind of becomes useful for us when we go out and improvise ourselves. And I think actually practicing a phrase in as many different contexts as possible is really useful. So that's a minor lick. So maybe the first thing you do is just pull up like a track where you know there's a minor chord in it. So maybe we could go like So What or something that's just D minor. And then try the lick out. Yeah, so here we go. If this is coming through. So in a few different ways, you can start to kind of manipulate it with rhythm, maybe other lines you learn, and you're kind of combining pieces of vocabulary, almost like you're constructing a sentence in a language. Like Ed was saying, it's very hard to actually create a new word and use it straight away. It's the same with a lick, like you can't actually use it straight away for the most part. You have to have some kind of context for it and maybe an existing vocabulary as well to a certain extent. But once we have it down, we understand the theory behind it. Maybe, oops, sorry. We understand the theory behind it. Then yeah, we can kind of improvise around that phrase and add stuff to it, or kind of subtract stuff to it, change the rhythm. That's one of my favorite ways to kind of play around with a lick. Or use the first 3 notes like that, for example. Experiment with like a small section of it. And I've found that to be probably the most useful for me, improvising wise, is doing that process kind of consistently. I think I've been doing that every day since maybe I was 13 or something, and just trying licks out every day and learning a new phrase. It doesn't even have to be that long, even something like that small. I just see it as a word. That could be like maybe a word in jazz fusion or jazz kind of language, or could even be part of like blues or something. All these styles have their own specific vocabulary, and the players each speak their own specific kind of dialect. I guess in blues, like someone like John Mayer has a similar dialect to Stevie Ray Vaughan, and in blues you can hear strong similarities. Sorry, in jazz you can hear strong similarities between Parker and Cannonball Adderley. And I think it's really good to recognize those similarities and learn those really strong pieces of language that you hear repeat all the time, because then you're really speaking the language in kind of a true sense, I think. Yeah, and what else was I going to talk about? I guess the process of actually acquiring language maybe is something that's important. So I like to transcribe by slowing stuff down, like a small lick, and I think there's so many, you know, we're really lucky in this day and age that it's really easy. My dad used to tell me he used to sit by a record player and have to like redo the needle and slow it down really annoyingly, and it'd take forever to get one small piece of, like one small lick. And these days we have entire apps dedicated to slowing down tracks, where we can actually just upload screen recordings of a song into the app and then slow it down straight away. So I did that before. I just got a little like Cannonball Adderley lick on So What, and I think it's a good one to look at. The app's called Transcribe Plus. I'll maybe just show the app. I think it's probably the best one I found. It's this one in the corner there. And what it allows you to do is upload a screen recording, as I said, just directly from your camera roll, and then it just enters the app. So that's the lick I chose before that I thought would be cool to look at. So slowing it down, we can start to really hear the notes. So this lick, once we learn it, like in whatever position on the guitar specifically, or whatever on other instruments, however we want to approach it technically, the app's Transcribe Plus. I'll maybe send a link in the chat. That might help. This lick is, yeah. So it's E flat minor. That's the first thing, I guess, whenever you're learning a new phrase. First thing is to just establish what the harmony is. We're E flat minor. Then we would analyze every note, like I said, intervallically. So we start on flat 7, 5, flat 3, 1. So the first little pattern is just a E flat minor 7 arpeggio. Second pattern would be 6, 4, 2, flat 7, which in this context is a D flat major arpeggio. We have another E flat minor arpeggio, but this time just E flat minor triad, 5, flat 3, 1, 5, flat 7, 5, 6, 4, and finish on the 5. So we've understood every single letter in a word that we've just learned from maybe a different language or something, and we've learned the context of it. We've learned how to use it in a sentence. It fits over this particular chord. That was the rhythm. And then once we have that, we would just go to a track and start kind of experimenting with it. Maybe we would go to like our favorite standards. It can really be anything. You could simply just type in like E flat minor backing track on YouTube or something if you want. Yeah, and then just try the lick out and see how it fits with maybe everyone has like an existing vocabulary on their instrument, and then it's just about acquiring new knowledge all the time, acquiring new words, and that will, I guess that ultimately, yeah, leads to quite an expansive vocabulary that you can draw upon when you improvise and play with other people and react like it is a language. And I remember one of the moments where I really heard that was a old James Muller record. I can't remember who the sax player was, but in the solo they were trading, and the sax player played something and then James played it exactly back, but then changed the ending. So for me, I was like, how did he understand exactly what that lick was then play it, and then play something completely different at the end of it, almost like a question and answer thing. Like they were having a conversation and he was repeating the idea and then saying something new over the top. And I guess the answer would be that they both knew that specific phrase within the language. It was maybe like a common bebop phrase that maybe originated from someone like Parker that they've heard Coltrane play, they've heard Cannonball play, they've heard Michael Brecker play. Everyone's played that phrase and they know that word. It's almost like the word tree, and they're just saying that word in a sentence in a different way, in a different context. So I think, yeah, that's how I approach improvisation. I don't know how much time that was. But yeah, I think that's good.
And thank you, guys. I mean, the audience should know that these are my favorite musicians, and I work with these guys a lot, and they always bring the best out of my my music. And one of the things that I appreciate is that all these musicians that that are here today, they have a good understanding. I mean, it's a thing of authenticity. I mean, there's a flavor in music. I mean, there's a colleague of mine that's doing research at New South Wales and looking at accents in music and, perception of accent in music. And, for example, Trevor plays percussion as well. And he makes the effort. You make the effort, I've seen you, of understanding and even the pronunciation of some, that's right, the pandero, even his pronunciation of some of the musical items, the musical elements, it's spot on. I mean, he can't speak Spanish, but he's understanding un poquito. He understands, what things are needed in order to have a degree of authenticity. I mean, I don't demand any kind of, I just demand, I'm not demanding, guys, but I demand a degree of kind of understanding of the music itself, because I mean, what I do is it's not traditionally authentic Latin music. The way I learned jazz, for example, the way that my approach to jazz is always being from the Tito Puente school of jazz. Tito Puente. I mean, I learned the standards not in a way that I learned Tito Puente's version of giant steps, and I never learned the Coltrane version of jazz, but I learned Tito Puente's version and Autumn Leaves and all those things. I was listening to that. That's what I grew up with. You know what I mean? From Santana, I took the step to Tito Puente and Iraquere, and that's the kind of, I mean, it's not, for me, it's not authentic either, because I come from a different area in South America, and I've explained that to some of my students in ethnomusic or in world music. So it's just a kind of a degree of respect, and a degree of kind of understanding of some of the things like the claves, for example. I mean, Ed Rodrigues has a really good understanding of the clave, and that's important, you know what I mean? Because you could be playing anything as long as you know where the rhythm flow, where the rhythm's accents. He was talking about the accent before, the cliche, and all these things, and those things are really important for me as a kind of as a Latin jazz musician. People kind of go, well, he's not a jazz musician. Well, I don't know. Am I a jazz musician? I don't know. I don't know if I'm a jazz musician, but I've been playing with jazz musicians, for the last 30 years. I mean, I was an original kind of member of the Catholics. I played with Mark Isaacs and everyone. Anyway, but I have more than an understanding, I guess. I have a great love for jazz, and that's why I like to combine these things. My improvisation comes from that, comes from the clave, comes from from understanding some of those polyrhythms and the syncopation, because in salsa music there's not so much the polyrhythms, but the syncopation, the way that you extend rhythms, the elasticity of the rhythm and those things. That's how I improvise. I like to improvise anyway, but I follow drummers. That's the kind of I mean, when Ed Rodrigues and I play together, we usually follow each other. And he's got the most incredible musical memory. He's always correcting me on my own songs. That's not the way we rehearsed it. Okay, cool. Sorry, man. And Ed Goyer and I go back a long way. We have a very similar kind of way of approaching music. And sometimes we used to say, well, it's going to be carnage tonight. Because, I mean, that's your expression, not my expression. That probably means that we're going to play a lot of notes, a lot of really fast notes and that kind of thing. But I mean, that's not the way we always play anyway. But we have those couple of songs that where we just can go nuts. And Lee, I mean, Lee is for me. Lee's the mouse. For me, he got that sound, but he also he can blow really high, and he has a really good understanding of the place of brass in Latin music. You know, more so than any other musician here. And so that's why we've been playing together. We've been working together for a long time. He has a really good understanding of Latin music, and he listens to it. And yeah, anyway, so that's to do with authenticity. And Josh, I mean, he's coming into the group, and I mean, we're doing things together, and incredible young. Sorry, I don't want to embarrass you here, Josh. Incredible young talent and amazing young talent. You know, as I said, one day, you know, the future of jazz is in your hands, man. Because he's younger than us, not because he's better. Okay. Anyway, so I'll take you back to Lee and question time for you guys.
I missed the start, so Waldo might have spoke about it, but I suppose seeing that Waldo's just uplifted all of you guys, what's the favorite part you guys have of, say, Waldo's technique or that collaboration? Because it's great to see the outside world perspective as well as the internal academic perspective as well.
Ed, do you want to answer that?
Me or Ed Goyer?
You, Ed Rodrigues.
Yeah, well, Waldo's got an incredible ability to like not just listen, but really get inside what you're doing. So when we play together, it doesn't feel like I'm sitting on top of a bass player or I'm restricted in what I can say. And that's a really important thing to have in not just a band leader, but a musician as well. It's someone that you know that no matter what little corner I want to turn down while we're on our journey, Waldo will be there. And if he wants to turn down a different corner, I'm cool with that. We'll just continually go with that. And it's that like ability to communicate, goes back to the language thing that I was saying. You know, Waldo's got a great vocab with a whole bunch of language. And yeah, that makes it really good when those two things sort of meet.
Yeah, I really love Waldo's groove. And I like the way that he doesn't let it slide. Like he wants to throw things in there and spike it up. You know, that keeps it buoyant. I also think he's got phenomenal technique. He doesn't always necessarily bring that out, but when he does, he plays the bass in a different way to other bass players that have that type of technique. I think he's very true to his influences, you know, and I kind of like that difference. It's that he really brings out something quite special with his cultural influence when he improvises and cuts loose. It's not just about you know, fanging out on the bass. He really kind of brings something of himself in those moments.
Yeah, it's vibe. One word, vibe. And that's one thing with this band, like we could turn up with no charts at a gig, whether it's at a concert hall or at a wedding, and just play for 3 hours and actually just make a show, like actually improvise the whole thing. Like everyone's got enough ability and enough sensibility to be able to know when to pull out. No, okay, maybe we do need a 8-minute bass solo right now while someone goes to the bar. No, and then know when to groove, and like everyone could actually you know, and it's actually about trusting your fellow musicians, knowing that that everything's covered. It's all covered here. There'll be great melodies coming from Lee. There'll be solid grooves coming from all the band. You know, amazing solos, beautiful use of color, and so it's not like it's going to be ever dull. And that's, I think, important, is being able to trust your band members, and then also being challenged by them. It's like, oh, we're going here. I don't know. This is actually awesome, unexplored territory. So yeah, there were some questions I saw pop up.
Yeah. The question from Mark Brownlee. Can you you see it?
Yeah. Something I struggle with in my improvising is getting caught up in trying to hit every chord change that I feel I'm not actually creating a melody. Question is, how do you guys, as an improviser, find a balance in playing the changes and creating beautiful melodies? Ed Goyer. Are you on mute, Ed?
Yeah, sorry, I don't put my mute on, it automatically goes on, I think. Is that right? Yeah, that's a really interesting question. There's sort of two parts to it. I mean, for me anyway, I try to find over the chord changes sort of, think rather than just actually playing, every change, think about, is there a scale that will join them up? Are there common tones that will link these chord changes together? So you're not really thinking about, I have to play maybe it's in one key. I mean, you can have a 3-6-2-5 that's got four different chords, but it's all in one key. So you tend to think more of, okay, what key is this in? The other thing about making the lines more beautiful is not to start on the tonic or the fifth every time you play a line. Maybe start on the 9th, maybe start on the 11th, the 13th. So that might add a bit more richness to the sound of your lines. If you tend to start on the tonic of every chord and, or the fifth, it tends to sound a bit like that Muzak type of stuff, So that's what I do, is try to avoid starting on the root notes or the fifth. I think more scale-like over the top. That's one idea. Maybe someone's got some other ideas.
Yeah, I mean, people talk about target notes, and when you're young and you start improvising, working out what your target notes are. And as Ed was saying, common notes within the harmony. So it's kind of a great exercise to work towards. Even if you go through a piece and you just on each bar, you just kind of put a target note, or across each melodic phrase you put a target note, and then you work your way to those target notes as a way of just kind of creating common connection to the harmony. And then that becomes, in a way, as Ed Goyer was talking about earlier, it becomes imbued in you, and you start hearing them rather than looking for them or preordaining them. You start hearing notes. The other thing is that you've got to listen to what people are doing around you. So, if you're playing a solo and the harmonic player with you, if you're just a melodic player, is like sucking up all of the main notes of the chords, well, you've got to go searching elsewhere. And the range also, where they're playing, like where are they playing a tonic and a fifth, and what is the relationship between you doing that and them, and what's in between? There's a famous story of Miles Davis going up to a piano player and just saying to them, don't play to the tonic, don't play that. That's my note. Like you color, that's my note, because he wants to be able to play. He wants to be able to get to the point where he's got a big resonating moment. And so if the harmonic player is all over the main part of the chord, sometimes it doesn't leave the soloist somewhere to go with power, because they're taking it away all the time. So it's a conversation between everybody as well. Yeah, Josh, you've probably got something to say about this as well.
Yeah, I definitely think the target note thing is super important, and just kind of awareness of intervals as you play and what they sound like as well. I guess that largely comes down to kind of interval training and, being able to hear a ninth over a chord before you kind of play it. And generally, I think to improve melodic playing overall, I think just learning as many melodies as possible is probably might even help the most, and really understanding how those melodies function over chord changes. And you see different structures. I guess we have song forms that you can apply to melodies too, like AABA or AB. Is if you start to improvise with those structures it definitely brings out a different side and maybe a bit more of a melodic side to your playing. As far as like trying to hit every chord change, I think what Ed was saying is kind of how I approach it exactly as well, where you group chord changes together. Like if there's a 3-6-2-5-1 that you all know is in the same key, or say like the first 5 chords of All the Things You Are, where it does a 6-2-5-1-4, all in the same key. You can lump them all together with one scale, and that kind of grounds you. And you know, eventually you might want to be able to target everything, or at least target everything in your head. Like that's another thing, you can be thinking about all the chords, but then only pick certain notes out as that chord hits. So maybe you play something for the F minor, but leave the B flat minor out. That's totally cool. And then maybe a tiny bit of the E flat 7 you accentuate before hitting the A flat major. You definitely don't have to hit every chord, and it's probably better if you find those common tones that can stretch across chords. So even, yeah, between chord changes that are from different key centers, maybe like the last 3 chords of that first 8 bars of All the Things You Are, where it goes from the D flat major, does a 2-5 into the C major, maybe a cool note over the D flat major, we have that A flat, which becomes the flat 5 of D, which becomes the flat 9 of G. That could be a cool common tone, which would then eventually resolve to either a G or an A, the 5 or 6 of C. Thinking in those terms has helped me the most with this approach. So, yeah.
Sorry, can we just get one more question? And I think the question is, how do you manage your influences to avoid sounding too much like one artist or other artists, I guess? What do you think, Trevor? I mean, saxophone players, I mean, they all sound the same. No, no.
Multiple personalities.
That it's an interesting one. I think you have to learn, if you're wanting to play in a particular style, you have to study, pick someone and learn as much, like play it and to totally absorb it and then move through it. Like I went through my Coltrane phase, and then you get to the point where it's like, well, it's not actually being creative anymore. I'm just now parroting, and then so you move away from it. But there's elements in there that you can turn into your own. That you can turn into your own stuff. So I think how to avoid sounding like people. Well, I mean, it's an interesting thing, like the alto saxophone. So I wrote a piece a few years ago that it calls for, so much of jazz music is about having your own sound, but then some players, you can, within a note, Ornette Coleman, one note you can hear that it's him. Eric Dolphy, one note you can hear it's him. Cannonball Adderley, one note you can hear it's him. John Chikai, Charlie Parker, and so I wrote a piece that actually, rather than it was actually changing the tonal quality to match, to the composition was about the sound as opposed to the notes. Because that's also, I mean, it's the same with Miles Davis on the trumpet. It's like one note you can hear it's him in any of his periods. He's so distinctive, and then you can hear people who are copying him. So how do you avoid it? Pray. Just keep going until it doesn't sound like it. Yeah, I mean, yeah.
It's a difficult one, that one. I mean, with bass players as well, I mean, how do you stop sounding like Jacko? There's so many Jackos around, there's so many, I mean, outstanding Clark. I mean, I guess if you listen to a few bass players, and then you might be able to come up with your own voice as well, and eventually, but it's very difficult. It has to do with strings, it has to do with, the choice of words and all those things as well, Like Jacko used to say, the sound is in your hands. In your hands, his hands, not everyone else's hands.
Yeah, I mean, it's back to also answering the question before. It is a lot about giving yourself limitations, and so like you can learn every Charlie Parker lick, but you can choose to not play them. And for example, like I was playing with some great jazz players many years ago. I remember I'd just sort of really been working on my 13th chords or whatever. And but they were into like, oh, like if you're going to play the 13th, it's really dag. Don't ever use that note. And so any time everyone played one during bubble playing, they'd just sort of point and laugh. He did the 13th, because it's like, it's just so jazz, and we're trying to avoid sounding like jazz. So don't use that note. Don't use that note. And when you start to take things out, and also Ian Date, the great Manouche style guitarist, I remember him talking years ago. It's just like try making a melody in only half an octave. Like only work within half an octave, and then extend it to, a seventh, and then only ever use one octave. And so with creating either creating a melody or working within a style, you don't have to play everything. In fact, less is more.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, someone said to me, maybe you listen to some of the Latin bass players, and I started to do that, and then someone said to me, "Oh, you sound like Sal Cuevas." Who's a really well-known Latin bass player. Okay, I'll give up. Something like that. But I mean, look, one thing about Jaco Pastorius, for example, I mean, Jaco would sound the same even if he played on a P bass, right? Because I've seen videos of him playing like a JD bass, which is an English bass, which sounds kind of very similar to, this is to answer Abraham Box's question. About, if you don't want to sound like Jaco, play a P bass. But Jaco sounded the same with every instrument that he played. Even when he played piano, it sounded like that was Jaco, his voices, So yeah, playing a JD bass, which is a kind of like a Marcus Miller slap bass. I'm sorry, like a Mark King, English bass player, slap king. But it sounded the same. Anyway, look, guys, we're going to have to leave it there. And thank you so much. Claire, are you there? Do you want to say, kick us out? You're muted.
Apologies. Yeah. Look, thanks so much for all of our guests and also all the audience for being such an engaged audience. Great questions and comments. I knew I wouldn't be wrong when I said it was going to be educational and entertaining, and it was all that and way more. I'm just really so pleased to have had all of you here. It's been a fantastic session, and I'd like to just say a really big thank you from all of us.